Oh, welcome everybody. Thank God for controversial ads, huh? They give us something to talk about at barbecues. People know what we do for a living, finally. Before we start, we're just going to go through very quick introductions. So you already know our names and our pictures up there, but I want the rest of the panelists to just give you an idea of their point of view, what they do, and sort of the lens through which they're looking at this topic, okay? And I'll start. My name is Mike May. I am a Vice President of Strategy at Huge. I work out of our DC office. And my job is to help shape brands' positioning so that they align with their business objectives. I guess I'm living and working in DC, so I exist literally at the intersection of brands and politics. So I guess I'm a natural fit for this topic. Nathalie?
Hi, I'm Nathalie, VP Strategy Director at Giant Spoon in LA. We are a full-service ad agency, and my job is to really partner with clients to figure out how they should actually engage or not engage in culture to solve business problems in very unique and interesting ways.
Hey everybody, my name is Randall Smith. I'm with the Procter & Gamble company, and I work in a small team that specializes in brand strategy and communications. We act as kind of consultants to the brand teams. And so I'm here, we typically get associated with different brands, and so I'd worked on the Gillette project called We Believe.
I'm Tom Chirico. I'm here on behalf of Twitter, and I lead a team called the Story Lab as part of Twitter Next, which is our internal consultancy for marketers and agencies. And specifically what my team does is we bring together data science, creative, and strategy to help marketers actually understand the conversations and the behaviors that are happening on Twitter, and then build ideas that capitalize on those behaviors that get people talking on the platform.
Great. So Randall mentioned that when he was working with Gillette, he was part of the team that brought the We Believe ad to market. This was the ad on toxic masculinity that was, what, about the beginning of the year, January or so? I'm sure you remember exactly the day.
Yes, I may, yeah, know the day and the time.
So I think maybe a good starting point is for Randall to tell us sort of the origin story of that ad. Give us an idea of how that came to be, the impetus behind it, who was responsible, and the thought process that went into that, and the duration of that. And then I'm going to poke him a little bit about what happened the day it launched and in the immediate, I guess we have to call it aftermath.
Yep. No, definitely. I mean, it was interesting. Actually, it was a project that started a few years earlier, and it really started with the younger members of the organization of Gillette. And they were saying that, yeah, we're very proud to work at this amazing brand. You know, it's great that we're selling, you know, these wonderful products, but like, what do we stand for? Like, are we only here to sell, you know, premium razor blades, or is there something, you know, more that this brand is supposed to be doing? So we really started a project of, you know, trying to articulate pretty clearly what our brand purpose was, so that we could use that as, you know, inspiration for, you know, how to take the brand forward, and as, you know, a judge of whether we should do something or not. And so where we ended up was Gillette helps groom the next generation of men. And so it was like, okay, you know, we have this part of the physical grooming activity and the products we sell them, but then also, you know, what does the brand stand for in terms of that transition of becoming a man, and, you know, all that that means. And what we found was that, you know, particularly around that time or a little bit before, you know, we had our selling line is the best a man can get. And, you know, as we were looking around, you know, there were a lot of things that were happening in culture where men weren't really acting the best they could be. And young men, I mean, kind of consistent with, I think, you know, Wade's presentation in the beginning, you know, trying to figure out what should they be doing. You know, is it like, okay, if I'm not, you know, somebody who's abusing, am I okay? And, you know, they didn't feel that that was right. And, you know, so what we thought we could do as a brand is to start a conversation around, you know, what should men be doing? And so actually the agency, when they presented the piece, they presented it as like pep talk for men, in terms of, you know, the enemy. Pep talk. You know, and it was like the enemy is in action. And, you know, what we were trying to say is like, hey guys, it's, you know, there's this great opportunity for men to step up and, you know, move the situation forward. So that was really the impetus of the project.
And so that's how it came to be. And it sounds like it was driven internally not by a desire for the brand to achieve some marketing objectives, but internally people who wanted to have greater meaning in the work they were doing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was the initial impetus, and then part of it is how do we, like any kind of business, we're brand stewards, we have responsibilities.
Right.
Part of it is how do you make a connection with your consumer audience.
Right.
And Gillette had kind of lost a connection with the young men who are important to the future of the brand.
Okay,
and so as we were talking to them about this, we found that this was a way that what we believed in and what we thought we could help facilitate this discussion would be something that would establish resonance with them.
So you landed on this topic, and you brought the film into existence. Then what? Before it reached market, what process did you go through to figure out how is the public going to receive this?
Yeah, no, so I know some of our partners are out in the audience. We tend to do a lot of research, both qualitative and quantitative. We did things like that. Another part was engaging our internal stakeholders, the leadership all the way up to the CEO, of like, okay, if we're going to come out and say something, are we all aligned to this? And is this something that we believe in? And then also, talking to other communities that are important. So, that was, you kind of do a sensing project, I guess, in terms of, what do we feel?
Right. And so it launched. Tell us about the day it hit.
Yeah, no, it was an interesting day.
Tom remembers it also, I'm sure.
Yeah, time code, and I have some notes. The first thing that happened was actually the day before. So I'd gotten an email from the CMO of our company, Mark Pritchard, and he said, hey, I'm at CMS, I'm going to be giving a speech. I think I'm going to show the film. And so I was like, great. We had gotten a lot of internal feedback that was positive. My son-in-law happened to be at CES. He sent me a video, like live stream of the reaction to the film, standing ovation, clapping. I mean, it was amazing. And so I was psyched, and I was looking forward to the next day of the official launch. And I came into the office and there was an email, and I had to write it down so that it was from an agency, and the email said, I'm reaching out to alert you that an anonymous trolling collective is currently coordinating a disinformation attack on the P&G brand, accusing you of threatening men's rights and eroding Western society as a whole in response to the Gillette ad. And honestly, when we got this, we sent it to our corporate security, trying to understand, is this like a phishing thing? And then as the day kind of evolved, it was like, oh, no, that was not phishing, that was some information. And so, yeah, I learned about the dark web. I hadn't known about it before. I grew up in Chicago, we're nice to people, and it was really an eye-opener.
Who would do this?
Yeah, I mean, we're just, people who know me, I'm kind of a conservative guy. I mean, it was like, this is the Good Samaritan story, right? Somebody needs help, you help them, this is a great opportunity. Well, that's not how it started, and so I may have been in my huddle room in a fetal position for the first day as just this vitriol came.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting, because then you go, okay, did we really do something wrong? You never want people to react to it. Anybody, this room, you've created things, and sometimes people respond the way you want, sometimes not. And, so that was, part of it. But then also, as I reached out, there's some people that I reached out to, for reactions.
Yep.
You also could see kind of the turn starting to happen.
Yeah, and I want to bring Tom into it here as well, because the controversy is a double-edged sword, right? On the one hand, it draws out the lurkers from 8chan and 4chan in coordinated attacks, but without something to push against, there's nothing to push back, right? So tell me what you saw as a result of this not just conversation, but the vitriol in the conversation that was happening.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So I think first and foremost, we say at Twitter that when you want to launch something new into the world, particularly something that connects with a conversation and culture that's happening already, Twitter's the best place to do that, because people are having those conversations on our platform every single day. You think about some of the biggest social movements in the last 5 years, whether it be Me Too or the Never Again movement in the wake of Parkland, or even recently Greta Thunberg and discussion around climate. These are the conversations that are trending on Twitter every day. So when a brand jumps into that and taps into those existing conversations, you're not just launching a brand message into an ether, you're tapping into something that's a movement, that's become a movement on our platform. And there's very, very big difference we see from a data perspective about moments and movements. So everyone, I think, likes to think of Twitter as something that's really about these sort of like spikes of moments. So Nike drops a shoe, a celebrity gets married, the Nationals win the World Series, for example. And these things oftentimes see a 24-hour spike in conversation. When something's a movement, something that taps into a bigger cultural nerve, we actually see the conversation pattern go from the 48 to 72-hour length of conversation. And the behavior that surrounds that is also really, really interesting. And we saw this with Gillette. So when our team of data scientists went back and looked at the drop of the Gillette spot, we found it actually had a very similar pattern to other movements on Twitter, which is first 24 hours, much like the reaction in the room at CES, the sentiment is very positive. So people are congratulating the work. The behavior on Twitter that you oftentimes see is retweets and quote tweets. It's typically people in the industry and the press and thought leaders congratulating the work, the progressive thinkers. By the 48-hour period, those people and the influence that they have on culture at large beyond Twitter have spread that message into other channels. So you start to see it in print, in television, in local news, et cetera. And when it hits the broader culture at large is when people start to have many different perspectives of reaction to that message. Yeah. And when you start to see the tension point of the message, of the positive that you saw in the beginning, and then the reaction now sort of hitting in the middle. That conversation then continues and debate starts, and in the 72-hour period and after, you see it sort of level off and almost a more true sense of the sort of cooler heads prevail of public opinion around the spot or the work afterwards. So we see this really interesting 72-hour conversation pattern around these things that's much different than when typically news drops on Twitter.
So you said culture about a dozen times. Randall was talking about it as well. I want to bring you in the conversation here as well, Nathalie. I think culture is has always been a part of good advertising, being aware of the culture and reflecting the culture. I think even more so today, and from my perspective, and I'd love to hear yours as well, brands are increasingly looking for ways to take advantage or to be part of important cultural conversations, right? So when brands are coming to you, how do you help them thread that needle between tying to culture in a way that's courageous and stopping short of cause-jacking?
Yeah, I mean, no one wants to culturally appropriate, right? I mean, I think it's actually pretty simple. I think it's figuring out what does your brand stand for, what's that value, and where's that intersection with your audience, and then calculating risk. Okay. I think it's easy to say, we're gonna put a cultural calendar together, and here's where we're gonna jump in and participate. I think a lot of it's actually restraint, and figuring out what's actually authentic to what we can say, from your CEO all the way down to your junior level, to the products and services that you have. And if you have that consistent action, then you should be able to participate. I think that a lot of times brands, look at what's out there, what people care about, and they're like, hey, we could do something about women empowerment. Like, we can do something about this. And it doesn't feel right. It feels so opportunistic. And so we'll talk with our clients and figure out what is that singular thing that you stand for, and let's courageously act on that behavior in any medium, any form. And I think we tend to think that it's just about marketing, but it's also business. So I would ask your client, if you stand for families, what does your paternity leave look like? I think we have to really be asking our clients these questions. But ultimately, it comes down to what is your audience value and what do we value? And then how can we act on that and create this world that we all want to live in?
And so that consistency, not just within the ad, but as it ripples throughout the rest of the brand and the rest of the organization, ends up being really important. And Randall, you told me a story a little while ago about how Gillette took steps to make sure globally that you were aligned before this hit.
No, it was really interesting. I mean, we kind of went through that thing where we were saying, okay, if we're going to be coming out to have this kind of message and culture, how will people assess us? And I think the authenticity part, otherwise it's just gonna, you almost do more damage if you're obviously not acting in a way that's consistent with that. And so, we went and we looked at, what were all the assets in the social media that we had control over? And if we didn't feel as though there was a coherence between those elements that were, created in the past and what we were saying we were going to act in the future, we took them down. And the same thing with work going forward. So the president had a phone call with, all the global leadership, and okay, this is the statement we're making. This is, what we say we believe in. Now, do you have any work that you think is, maybe inconsistent with this? And, there was one region that had a major initiative that was going into market. The communications were produced, tested, all of those kind of things. And they said, yeah, no, I don't think it's consistent with this. And he was like, okay, it's not going into market. Just shut that down.
Yeah, when I feel like I talk to a lot of brands about this, and I always know there's two things that happen when I know a brand is really serious about entering into space. The first is you enter the room and it's not just the marketing communications people there.
Right.
If it's something that ripples throughout their whole organization, that they're genuinely serious and this is a part of the core values of their company. The second is that they've done something before they're talking about what they're going to tweet about. So whether it's part of the heritage of their company, actions they've taken as a brand, et cetera, they're talking about how to best communicate the things they've done versus talking about how to craft the perfect communication for something they maybe hope to do in the future.
So if I could paraphrase, it almost sounds like you're saying a brand by itself can't have an authentic point of view unless the company has an authentic point of view that's being amplified by the brand or represented by the brand. Is that right?
I think so, and then I think that piece of advice, that's a piece of advice I've given a lot of the brand teams that I've worked with, is like, do something, do it because it's the right thing, and then when there's a moment that's appropriate to talk about it, then share that with other people. But you should be doing the thing because it's the right thing to do for your brand and for your consumers.
Mm-hmm. So where authenticity is challenged, and I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit here, is often when opportunistically the brand and the business stand to benefit from it, right? We tend to anthropomorphize brands by saying brands believe in this and brands believe in that. It's not true, right? The brand can't believe in anything any more than the wind can have hopes and dreams. What the brand can have are attributes ascribed to it, right? So how do you have that conversation internally about authenticity and ensuring the brand has a right to enter into a controversial conversation in the first place, where they're not cause-jacking, they actually are trying to do something that is important or authentic to, I don't want to say the brand, but to people who are making decisions, because that's who is involved, right?
I can speak in on this one. It's actually really interesting. So just a couple days ago, I was at the Highlights office. Hopefully you guys know what Highlights is, the children's magazine, and love them. Mm-hmm. And we were talking with the CEO, Ken, and if you guys remember a couple months ago, he tweeted about when we were putting kids in cages. And it's really interesting because immigration and kneeling during the national anthem are the two most polarizing topics. We're talking about controversial stands. Mm-hmm. Immigration is the most divisive among generations. And this is a brand that is not a ruffle the feathers type of brand.
And this tweet was from the Highlights account, not from a personal account?
This was a Highlights account from Kent, the CEO.
Okay.
And when we talked to him about it, because we're like, it must have been scary. And he's like, no, it wasn't scary at all. They've had a mission for 75 or almost 75 years that children are the world's most important people. And the entire board all believe that children are the world's most important people when it came to this world event or this cultural event. And they actually saw that it was becoming highly politicized. And they're like, people aren't realizing that it's actually children in cages because they're just mudslinging each other. He's like, I feel compelled to say something. And they've had 75 years of standing up for children through their content and through all the experiences that they've created. And I asked him, so what were your KPIs on this? And he said, I told our VP of analytics to not show me anything He's like, I don't care about sales, I don't care about subscriptions, I don't care about, all this. And if someone on my board speaks up, I'll point back to the mission. But I think when you are going to take a controversial stand, like you said, everyone has to be on board. And hopefully, if you do have that mission that you can point back to, where it's not about politics, it's about that value that you have, that you've had for 75 years or since your inception. And he was able to make that decision.
And Highlights is a private company.
Highlights is a private company.
So
it's much harder for
so Randall.
Yes.
I'm from the public company.
Let's talk about what success looks like and those KPIs, right? And making sure, how do you do that? How do you make sure that you're not doing harm by trying to do good and damaging shareholder value for the sake of a broader understanding of stakeholder value, your customers, your employees, the community that you serve?
Right. No, I mean, it's a tricky one because, again, there's an intent and then there's how something gets consumed. And so, the intent that was it started with how are we going to connect with the next generation of men, who are really important to us, knowing what's important to them, and then, putting out the stand. And so, yeah, we had all kinds of metrics, and I went to a very quantitative school, but, for me, the most important measures are the, personal measures. I don't know. I'm going to get really personal now, and if I tear up a little bit, I apologize in advance. My son is 21, so he's kind of, a core prospect for the brand. And he's been judging advertising for probably as long as he can talk because, he's been seeing all of my stuff. And I showed it to him, and I was like, okay, so what do you think? He's like, Pop, this is the best thing that you've ever done in your career. He's like, this is the world that me and my friends are living in, and nobody's really talking about it. And, so again, for me and the understanding of the brand purpose or mission, that was one very important metric. And then the other thing, in addition to all the numerical stories we were getting, we were hearing stories of how real people were reacting to it. And one, I had a very good friend who had been working at an advertising agency. She was based in London. I was like, oh, what do you think? Like any good agency person, she gave me some comments on the execution. And then, thank you very much. It's in market, I can't change it. But then she said a really interesting thing. My best friend, she's a teacher in East London. And she told me that she took the spot and showed it to her class and said, hey guys, I think this is something that we should talk about. And then it was all a student-led discussion. And so for me, given that the initial purpose was to, start a discussion about, the opportunities for men to have an impact on, kind of what's going on in society, that was, for me, I rung the KPI bell.
For sure. Part of the calculus for some of the clients I've talked to is also, how do I make sure that the groundswell is greater than the backlash? Right? And there's always the assumption that's going to happen. And the nice thing about brand is that you can say, well, the groundswell is going to show up in 3 years. We can't measure it today. But based on what you've seen, Tom, what evidence do you have to help unravel that question?
Well, I don't think that there's a one-size-fits-all bit of evidence that says, every brand that jumps into a potentially controversial or issue that's filled with tension necessarily is immune from backlash by any means, or that the positive is going to outweigh the negative. Like I think we all work in an industry of risk, and sometimes that happens when you're going to put risky work out there. But I think that again, the work from Gillette, and I think another example of this is Nike's Kaepernick work. Again, we oftentimes see sometimes in the press the negative reactions around these things. So people burning their Nike shoes or cutting the tops off of Nike socks or all this crazy stuff, because that's the sort of sensational reaction that actually spawns another reaction as well.
Yeah.
We get into this sort of like outrage loop, if you will. But time and time again, for these things that we've analyzed, is that these brands, particularly the ones that know that they're standing up for a message that the customer group that they want to be their customers is also agreeing with, we're seeing benefits both on Twitter and off Twitter.
Yeah.
Like, and I'll give you an example of this, like Dick's Sporting Goods, for example. In the wake of the Parkland shooting, Dick's announced on Twitter as part of a tweet thread that they're going to stop the sale of assault weapons. Dick's Sporting Goods then, in the next 30 days, saw a 12,000% increase in the number of tweets that were about the brand. 80% of those tweets were positive. Also within that 30-day period, online sales jump up 27%. And their next earnings call, their shareholder value went up 24%. So by all means, it's not to say that every single time a brand jumps into an issue, those are the results that happen. But I think that's a really good indication of Dick's really understanding who their customer is, what they care about, and being willing to kind of stand by that, even though there was probably going to be, a handful of negative tweets potentially about that move.
Yeah.
Just one thing, because we've found over the, looking at a number of brands and programs, like invisible work, that has like 0 ROI, So,
Yeah.
I mean, the work has to connect at some level. And so, you can almost look at it as it's safe work because I've taken all risk out of it.
Yep.
But then you've probably taken out the opportunity to connect with people.
Yep. Yeah. So, and we're almost out of time, so I think we have one more short part of the conversation we can have. I think a lot of us, in one way or another, are stewards of brands. And we are seeing, I think, undeniably, that brands have an opportunity to be a platform for social change. If you could give a piece of advice to a brand steward who is thinking about how to harness the platform that their brand represents, what would that be?
Yeah, it's a good question. Something that we always tell our clients is, what is the world that your audience lives in now? What are they up against? And what's the world that we want to create? And how can we make ourselves essential in that? Again, it goes back to audience and brand, that intersection. And then think of all the really interesting ways that you can swing big to create that world. And it doesn't have to be a tweet, but it could be. It could be a CEO letter in the New York Times, like Whitney Wolfe Herd did during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. It could be a product, it could be an initiative, but think of all the engagements that you have with your audience. Those are moments where you can courageously act on that belief. And that's how you create that consistency, that's how you can stay authentic, and that's how you can also take controversial swings.
Yep.
Yeah. I guess the only thing I'd add is, also think about the opportunity to make it a sustainable opportunity. So something where you can envision this being an ongoing activity that will, build your brand. And so I think, the ingredients are all the things that you talked about, but thinking through, okay, what is year 2? What is year 3? What is year 4? Because the worst thing you can do is do it and then leave. Then I think it's like you shouldn't have done it at all, because you'll just get crushed for like, okay, I thought you were saying you stand for this, and now what are you doing?
Yeah, and you're saying to treat it like a strategy, which is really interesting. I mean, we took a look at a lot of cases and at how people were responding differently. And one of the brands that took a potentially controversial stand, didn't get as much of an uplift, was Patagonia, when they announced they were suing the federal government. And they've been doing this for so long that, when they go out and sue the federal government, their customers say, seems about right, sure. and so it's less controversial. It's exactly who they have become as a brand.
Right.
What about you, Tom?
I mean, I think just to piggyback on that, I think that if you think about the number of people that are die-hard Patagonia enthusiasts versus other outerwear brands, they're diehards because of that.
Yeah.
I mean, and they're lifelong customers of Patagonia. The piece of advice, though, I think back to your original question, I think is, one of the things that you mentioned about the Gillette work that I think is so important, and a lot of this work is derived from, is it kind of starts with employees and as part of people's own companies. REI, Opt Outside, closing on Black Friday, started as an employee program as well. Oh. So I like to kind of say sometimes, if you're going to recruit the best talent that you can possibly go after in 5 to 10 years from now, what would you want them to tell them that you did in this moment?
Yeah.
And I think that's oftentimes, like, it kind of puts people on their heels a little bit. But it oftentimes gets people to think that they can make a difference there.
Awesome. You guys, I wish we had more time, but I think we have to wrap it up there. And I wish we had time for Q&A here, but I'm afraid we don't. However, we're all going to linger right out there by those round white ottomans as soon as we drop our mics. So if anybody has some more questions, you can come talk to us out there in a few minutes, okay? Thank you, panelists. Thank you very much.